Welcome back to Beyond Words by Pop Family. You may be wondering, Heidi, why are there two versions of this episode on my feed? Here's the thing, Tina, my guest, and I are both speechies, and we got a little bit carried away and started going down some clinical rabbit holes. Our main goal at Beyond Words has always been to simplify things for parents, so we made the call to split it up and put the clinical jargon version into a separate extended cut. The version you're listening to is the one for parents who might be newer to the topic of neurodiversity or want to cut straight to the point. There is no right or wrong episode to listen to. Myself and Tina go through in this episode what is neurodiversity, what does neurodiverse mean, we cover what it means to care for someone who's neurodivergent, and what neuroaffirming speech therapy practice looks like. Tina Evans is one of our speech pathologists here at POP, holding the title of Clinical Lead for Neurodiversity. That basically means that it's Tina's role to be across everything neurodiversity. Formally, Tina has a Bachelor of Health Sciences, majoring in hearing and speech, and completed a Master's in Speech and Language Pathology at University of Sydney. Tina, welcome to Beyond Words.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to have you on. I'd love for you to talk our listeners through a little bit about you. Who is Tina? Why did you become a speech pathologist, and why are you passionate about neurodiversity?
I really wanted to help people. I think coming out of high school, I tried to get into medicine and find my way there. I started in a Bachelor of Health Sciences, majoring in hearing and speech, and I loved it so much that I decided speech pathology was the way to go. So I ended up doing a master's, and while I was studying, I actually worked as a support worker for children with disabilities. I worked with Northcote in their respite service, which involved doing a lot of the caring aspect and community reach programs with those children. That really inspired me to go into the neurodiversity space, because those children just, I guess, left a lasting impression on me and really made me want to be the person that went out there and advocated for them to meet their communication needs, but also to help other people see what I could see in them. Personally, I also have some neurodivergent family members that also inspire me every day to do the work that I do.
So lucky for us that you didn't take the medicine route. So mostly going to be mums listening. And really, I've been largely non-clinical since I had Minnie. I was seeing two little fellows, both neurodiverse, but that's a very small snapshot of neurodiversity. You know, my brother's neurodiverse. I have a whole career of working with neurodiverse kids. I'm very, very passionate about it. But I've been a mum, really, for the last 3 years. I'm coming from a parent's perspective and what I imagine the parents are thinking out there, because they're seeing this change in language and a shift towards the use of the term neurodiversity. And I just want to know what it means. Like, what does neurodiversity mean?
Neurodiversity is really a term that covers all the diverse brains that we have as humans. So it recognizes that no one person has the same brain. And neurodiversity, as the term itself, actually encompasses both neurotypical and neurodivergent brains. So neurodiversity is a collective term. It refers to a group. Yeah. And I really love this visual from the lived experience educator. It's the neurodivergent umbrella, which may be familiar to some people, but it really captures just how many different brains might fall under the term neurodivergent. Like, we often think autism, ADHD, potentially cerebral palsy, but there are so many other brains that do fall under this term of neurodivergent. So when we use that term to refer to individuals, these are some of the individual brains that do fall under that. And as speech pathologists, we would more than likely come across all of these different brains. It's about recognizing that our brains are different in terms of how they develop and how they function and even behave. And that can then mean that we have differences in how we interact and explore with the world. And that is totally okay. We can be neurotypical or neurodivergent, and we just have a different way of viewing and being in the world. And that's what neurodiversity is all about.
I love that, because I really I really, what's the word? I identify with neurodiversity so strongly. Like my personal experience of being neurodiverse, every single person, what we're saying essentially is that everybody is neurodiverse.
Yes.
There is a spectrum of brains in the universe and everyone fits into it somewhere, but it is vast.
Yes. Yes,
And
exactly.
there are certain parts of our neurodiversity that make us who we are and make us unique. And being neurodivergent is just a way for us to explain a certain, I'm trying to simplify this, but just a certain number of different diversities. Like what's the difference between, because I mean, there's part of me that really wants to, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole today, but like, what is neurotypical? You know,
Yeah. Yeah. So I
like,
guess a good
I'm
way
not
to
typical.
view that is, well, yeah,
I mean,
what
I
is it?
am.
Yeah.
Technically, I'm classified as neurotypical because I sort of see it as like, I loved school. I'm pretty type A. I'm, organizing and stuff like that comes easy to me. So that's more neurotypical, but like I hate bright lights. I'm overstimulated really easily, which are,
You have sensory differences
yep,
and
more.
preferences.
I toil my hair. I used to suck my thumb, all of those things that
Yes.
lean towards I needed to regulate. Um, how do we tell the difference?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I guess that's where the lines can blur sometimes and where terminology can get confusing. But neurotypical really refers to, I guess, the majority of brains that have more similarities than the neurodivergent brains, I suppose. So neuronormativity is another word that's sort of thrown around.
Oh,
Yeah,
normativity.
big one. But I guess it's looking at the majority of brains processing and developing in a certain way, whereas neurodivergent brains have a lot more diversity and differences in how they develop from a neurocognitive perspective. And when you look at society as a whole, there are more brains that might be similar, and then your neurodivergent brains are often marginalized because they don't function like the majority, if that
Yep.
makes sense. And it comes from, like, I guess, models of disability as well,
Yeah,
recognizing that these differences often mean that people with neurodivergent brains are marginalized in society at times.
absolutely. Do we have any stats on that? Like,
Approximately 15 to 20% of the global population is considered neurodivergent.
there you go.
That's what AI tells us.
Thanks, AI.
Um, yeah, I guess it's really difficult to tell because there would be people out there that may be neurodivergent but may not have gone down the pathway of getting a diagnosis formally. So
Yes,
they wouldn't fall into
of
that, but
course.
who knows?
And so now I want to help understand this term, I actually want to go into the past a little bit. So a decade or so ago, I've been a speech pathologist for, you and I are pretty similar. I'm about 11 years now, anyway, around a
I'm a few
decade.
years behind.
And so when I first started, the term neurodiverse or neurodivergent didn't exist.
Mm,
Had like disability and non-disability, and there were certain parts of neurodiversity that didn't fit into disability. So, and certain neurodivergent people that didn't want to have the term disability placed
yes.
alongside
I,
them.
mhm.
And so, how I feel is that we have really progressed in
Yes.
our explanation of basically diversity of brains, which is awesome because everyone has a different brain. And it used to be this disability term that not everyone fit into, and then we would have
Mm,
these other terminologies for, like, children with dyslexia and and some people would say that's a learning disability
mhm.
as opposed to and so we would use this term. And then I feel that, correct me if you disagree, but when the NDIS started rolling out, I feel like the language and terminology changed to functional.
Yeah. I think a lot of it came back to the WHO's international classification of functioning as well. It all sort of
Mm.
came back to that, which talks about, I guess, differences in participation and functioning and how potentially a diagnosis may, or a different brain now, might change the way that someone interacts and is able to participate in their world. And what the ICF does is I mean, it's been around for ages now. I couldn't even tell you for how long, but it's something that we got taught at university, and it's ongoing, and we always refer back to it, and even the NDIS refers back to it. So it recognised that there were barriers to participation with the population that is marginalised, our neurodivergent brains. So I guess we recognise that it's sort of come from there, but almost evolved with the different models of disability and advocacy groups really speaking up for, hey, services and choices in terms of participating in society should actually fall back on the choice of the individual, regardless of how their brain works or what diagnosis is attached to their name. So it's evolved quite steadily, I guess, over the last few years, but not without the really hard work of groups of people that are neurodivergent, and have been voicing their opinions and their experiences to help us get there. So I
Absolutely.
guess in the allied health professions and the medical model as a whole, like there has been a shift in the way that we think, and for the better. And hopefully we keep progressing that way so that we can keep recognizing differences and not trying to change them.
It just comes down to, I mean, if I'm to oversimplify it, like empathy
Yes.
and not sympathy, empathy.
Empathy. Yeah.
Put yourself in another person's shoes and what would they actually want, not what do you want. It's the
Mm,
biggest learning curve for me. As a clinician, I felt like I was really good at it, but like in my family or,
yes.
when I have my clinician's hat on, I'm like, "Oh, I'm quite strong with that skill," but it's still just a really difficult skill to transfer into different parts of your life, like when you're ordering a coffee or, to think, "What does that other person want or need, or how do they wanna participate in this activity?"
Yeah, definitely. And I think we also have to bring in like differences in experience, in lived experience, not regardless of neurotype. You'd be looking at what someone's journey was from birth and how they were raised and what values and experiences they have had in their environments. That also changes the experience. As speech pathologists working with parents and families from all sorts of walks of life, and they bring a lot of that, which makes understanding the concept of neurodiversity sometimes a bit of a journey, and that's okay too. But we can't separate that and the experience of neurodiversity from someone's upbringing and background and potentially even trauma and experiences that they come with as well.
Yeah, it's the big picture,
Yeah.
essentially, shapes
Yeah.
your brain. I remember that lesson at uni where it's like, "This is your brain when you're born, and then it's like this."
Yes.
So, like, obviously, yes, there's nature, but there's a lot of
A lot
nurture
of
and
nurture.
environmental impacts. And I mean, gosh, we do not have enough time to talk about that today. But you've just made me think about, I wanted to get in the passion zone before this
Yeah.
morning talking to you. And I actually listened to the Yellow Ladybugs podcast
Love them. Yes.
this morning. You're talking about lived experience, and I listened to it was a nice quick one, 15 minutes, masking and internalizing. She talks about what it was like for her to go to school. And I was just like, my heart was just out of my chest. Like, this is all of the kids that I've been fighting for the last decade, essentially. And it was this awful experience of becoming a speech pathologist. And I loved school. Like, I cried the day I left school. Such a freak. I shouldn't say that word, but like I loved it so much and I just wanted to stay. Got with my friends every day. I'm an absolute extrovert. It was just a big sleepover. I was a school prefect or whatever. I just loved the structure.
Yeah. You thrived on that.
And I just becoming a clinician, I could not. And I had a brother with a disability.
Yes.
Jack has Down syndrome. He's neurodivergent. I knew that school wasn't great for him. Gosh, I was in grade 1 kicking shins when I noticed that they were pushing him around, or kids were pushing him around on the playground. But I hadn't really, as a child, obviously, put those 2 things together and really thought about what school as a structure or as an
Mm,
institution or the system, we call it, what that
yes.
would be like for those kids. It really makes me now as a mother think about those structures. And even if my kids are neurotypical, like, should we be supporting that structure? Because it's not necessarily equitable for
No.
all
Yes.
the different brains that exist. And I know the level of privilege that I come from when I think about that decision. Like, I think if I have a neurodivergent child, my choice would probably be to homeschool them.
Yeah,
But
it's a very tricky area, and I mean, even with a lot of the families I work with now, we run into barriers at school,
yeah,
and the speech pathologist often does take the role of advocating for those families in those spaces, and it's all part of neurodiverse affirming practice, where we can voice our opinions and our what we can see in terms of what this child can do, so that they can have their potential met at school. And it's often really challenging because of the structures that are already in place. They reflect an even bigger system that's bigger than even them, that sort of says this is the way that we should learn, and this is the way that we should develop, and this is the way that we should interact. And like, it works for some kids, but it doesn't work for all kids. Like, I myself was a bit introverted at school. It wasn't my favorite place.
if we go back to the stats, like what, 15 to 20% are
20
neurodivergent, 20%. And so, that's 15 to 20% of kids that are
Yeah.
unlikely to enjoy a classroom.
Yes. Yeah. And in order for schools to meet their learning needs and their differences in how they learn, we also need resources and funding, which is a whole other topic. But it
We're
makes,
not getting into it
yeah,
today.
it
Basically,
creates more barriers, and then
if
it often
we're
comes
being
at, yeah,
idealistic, this is how we're talking. If we have all the resources in the world, sure, but most teachers and schools don't have that.
no,
So then
they
that's what
try
we're
their
working.
best. Yes, they
Exactly.
do try their best. And yes, I guess that's where we're really pivotal in being that voice for that family and those students, and just sort of
Um,
helping where we can to help people understand their neurodiversity and their differences and their learning needs.
so as a speech pathologist, what does it mean to be ND affirming? And I'm gonna say ND affirming because so that we don't have to say the whole, so what is it? What is that?
You kind of touched on a key word before about having empathy, and I'm so proud to be part of a profession that inherently comes with that. A lot of us fall into the role of speech pathologists because we are empathetic people and we want to do the best for the greater good. But it really starts with acknowledging people and valuing them for who they are, and being in a place to say, hey, I know you've got a different brain. I love your brain. I love that you are different and you learn and play in a different way. And I'm here to tell you that that is okay. I'm not here to change your brain or teach you a certain way of thinking. I'm not here to say that there's one way to do things or one way to interact with the world. Neurodiversity affirming practice is really putting a bit of a spin on traditional approaches and looking at moving away from deficit based therapy. We're not trying to fix anything. We're just trying to value the person and honor them for who they are and how they think, and use much more of a strengths based approach to help them develop their skills and their communication, so that they do have more opportunities to interact positively with their world.
All right. Now I'm gonna play the devil's advocate.
Go
I'm
for
a
it.
parent. I'm a parent. What you just said sounds amazing. It sounds idealistic, but this new language, and it is a new way of thinking. You've still got to learn to read, right? To function in the world. And some people are never going to learn to read. And that might be a cognitive level that they can't, their brain isn't going to be able to do that process. But learning to read is not natural. It's a learned process.
Yes.
And then there's evidence-based practice, which I've spent a lot of my career doing with neurodiverse kids and adults, mind you, and it works. But how does that kind of structured learning and or drill-based, or like this is the way that we should learn, how does that fit into ND affirming practice?
So I guess evidence-based practice is actually taking our clinical experience along with the evidence and being creative in how we approach and deliver interventions. I guess going back to training at university, a lot of the intervention programs that we get taught are one way. There is, this is how you work through a speech sound error, and this is how you work through literacy skills. That's the top part, right? That's the best scientific evidence.
Evidence, yeah.
That's what we have available to us at the time.
That's what people get hung up on, like,
Mm.
this is the study that's been done and this is what we have to do.
Yes. But there are so many aspects that haven't been researched. And if you think about neurodiversity, it's actually really challenging to uh, research for all the different types of brains, different learning and different skills. So if you were to potentially look at how someone learns language, a lot of the language studies are based on one way of learning language. They're based on analytical language development, which is what the neuronormative population will often learn language in that way. But we don't really have many studies on how that could look different for our neurodivergent kids because they haven't put those populations together. It's really tricky. There's so much diversity in it. So it's hard to get a control group. It's hard to create that robust research. So, I mean, that means we're left with what we've got. And in order to actually do the best EBP practice, we have to also then use our clinical experience and what we've seen to be different and diverging from the typical or the neurotypical, and then be creative in how we approach what we've got, the intervention programs, and not be scared to change the way that we deliver them in some aspects to meet our neurodivergent clients' needs and also their values about how they want to interact with the world. And this is where, when I'm talking to parents about the whole idea of neurodiversity, we might really just focus in on their child and talk about, well, what does your individual child's learning trajectory look like? What has their development looked like? What has their journey so far been? That is so important to setting the ground running for speech therapy to start off with. We want the foundations of, I understand what that family has been through so far and where everything's going and what their expectations and values are for their child going forward. And if we can do that, then we can set goals that really affirm who they are as a person, but also don't necessarily set expectations for them to meet neurotypical norms or milestones because we have recognized that this child is developing in their own way, their own trajectory, and that's okay. So it's, I guess, part of ND affirming practice is really having those open discussions with parents about what that looks like for them, their family, their child, and what they understand about it, because we often don't get there straight away. We might have to go on a bit of a journey together to understand the child even more and understand their neurodiversity and support parents to also come along with that idea, because we do live in a world that is still very much based on the majority way of thinking. It's neurotypical, the expectations in society about how we go to school, as we said, how we go to work and how we interact and socialize, very much still ingrained in neurotypical expectations because that's the majority. So it is a learning curve. It's a learning curve for parents. It's a learning curve for educators. It's a learning curve for the whole care team, OTs, physios, psychologists, whoever's on board. And it's often a team effort. So I guess neurodiverse affirming therapy is also really holistic. And we talk about holistic therapy and family and child-led therapy all the time. It brings all of that together, but under this big lens of it's okay to be different.
That's a really good explanation. In the past, if we're looking at that EBP, which is evidence-based practice, we're just showing that picture. And like 1/3 of it, or where you arguably start, because we go to uni and we train and we learn like all of the academic stuff. Like, this is what the studies have said. So you start from that background and then you gain clinical experience. And I tell you what, there is no better training than actually just doing the job and learning how different people with their different brains react to different stimulus and different
Yes.
activities and different feedback. And arguably, that is just the most fun I've ever had in my life, is doing that. And then largely you work out what works and what doesn't work from that. But my favorite arguably my favorite part, and where I think being holistic, like you said, comes in, is the patient values, because you are taking your training as a speech pathologist, then you're taking your clinical experience, what you've done in the past, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and then you've got to overlay it. You've got to take on basically that empathy. If you don't have it, you're going to do a bad job. It's going to be like a three-legged stool, and you've chopped off one leg of the stool. If you aren't deeply invested in knowing the family and the child's values and where they've come from and where they want to go, then you're doing a bad job. And you're not going to be a great therapist, and you're certainly not going to be ND affirming either, because you can't just plaster exactly what you think and what you've studied onto a family and expect it to work. And it's a lot of the reason why I started POP, because I was sick of trying to fit children into a system that didn't necessarily work. And I was a vehicle for this system that I didn't love, and I wanted to be able to create something that was different.
You're bringing up like previous experiences like early in my career, which I guess made me even more so passionate about like just advocating. But I've been in clinical situations where I've seen other clinicians who have taken their learnings from university and really honed in on that evidence-based practice, ultimately without even realizing we're forcing a child to interact in a certain way, even though they were neurodivergent. And I remember being this early clinician sitting there watching that going, that child is in distress. You're not doing anything that looks to be harmful, but at that cognitive, emotional safety level, you're probably harming them without realizing. And that comes back to ideas around masking and forcing children to act in a certain way, creating this stress and trauma that we may not realize as neurotypicals, but it is inherently there. And just years and years of that, like a lot of our neurodivergent kids are in therapy for the long haul. They're here for several years. They might be here for life, and we support them throughout different parts in their journey. But if we've got a therapist that is not aware of their own biases and the nuances within the therapy that may actually be forcing a child to act a certain way, then we might be inherently creating masking and teaching them how to not be them. And that takes up so much more energy and ultimately leads to burnout. And whole other podcast in itself.
I just want to do a whole podcast on masking, because I've done this. Like
We all have, yeah.
right? Like, and so this is not a guilt trip for a speech pathologist who's made them cry. Like, all of us have made a child cry because you're coming to our office to do something difficult. And if a child hasn't cried in your office, I don't know if you're doing therapy. Like, at some point, you've pushed a little bit too hard, or you've gone that level. So, for parents, we sort of work on a staircase, and our job is to find the perfect
challenge level.
Perfect challenge.
Yes.
That's not too hard, but it's not too easy. And then just incrementally do. And so if you go too high, the wheels fall off. And
we still do that with our neurodivergent kids.
I do that all the time. It's not that you're not neuroaffirming if you do that. It's that it's forcing, because I come back to, right, if I go back to EBP and make it really simple, parent values. So I've worked with families, right? I used to work in Sydney early in my career. Best training ground ever. I had highly intelligent, highly paid academic parents sending their neurodiverse child to me to keep them at grammar.
Yeah, I've had that too.
And I was like calling my mum saying, this is not me. This child also really valued academia. That was the family environment that the child had grown up in. And actually, they were so academic. They just didn't learn in the way that I was trying to teach them. Like, I was early in my career. I was like, I don't agree with this. But as a more experienced clinician, I could have done a way better job. Now.
But that's part of your journey to getting you to being a more affirming therapist. And
because I was just drilling this kid. And the child was, just not. I just didn't understand, but it was the values, my values and my biases, and it really affected me being able to really work with that child. I could have changed my clinical practice to make it work better, as opposed to the same profile child who has a farming family whose parents are happy with their child doing farm labor when they leave school, you know? And that parent's values is completely different to the values of the family who are completely academic and want their child to be a doctor.
Yeah, exactly. And that just is a great example of you've got your child in the middle or your young adult, all different ages, neurodivergent. We recognize that. We recognize what that looks like in terms of how they develop, how they learn, how they play, how they prefer to interact with the world. But then you also have to look at the people around them and their expectations and biases, and then the environments that they are in. So it's putting ND affirming and holistic practice together. You can't separate any of those concepts. They all come together and go hand in hand.
And I think that that's what the risk of when you
Mm.
read. So we've got this great handout essentially that we're going to give alongside this podcast. And that's the risk that when someone reads, oh, we're going to do it in their way or that's strength based. So I really want to jump into the checklist that we've got
Yes,
because I want
let's
to
do
talk.
it.
I want to talk with you through some real life examples, and I wanted the therapy that builds on strengths because when people first started working for me at POP, one of the things that I would love to do, so this is one of the ways that I've always been neuroaffirming, and it was the way that I was trained as well by a great clinician, is that you've got to find what they're really good at.
Yes. What
Like,
they're really good at and what they really like.
because if you don't know what they're really good at or what they really like, well, number one, how are you going to build rapport? How are you going to make friends with this kid or adult or whoever's coming into your office? How are you going to get them to do something hard? I would find whatever that child was better than me at, which was generally a lot of stuff. And I would have just games. Generally, I would pick my games and toys based on my deficits. Most of my caseload were autistic or ADHD of children and young adults. And many of them, not all, but many of them were just epic at puzzles.
Puzzles, yes.
So good. And I'm not good at puzzles. I'm a words and language girl. And so they would just smash me in these puzzles. That's my example of strength-based. But a parent would be like, but they're just playing games. Why? And can you give an example of therapy that builds on strengths?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of, before I jump into an example, a lot of it comes back to how we describe what we're doing with parents. And some parents do really what they want you to do, that they want you to go with their child's interests, and that's amazing because they're honoring the way that their child plays. But while we do the game or the puzzle, we are often modeling language and commenting and using a lot of positive affirming language as we do so to encourage that child to play and learn in that way. So another example is I have a lot of autistic clients and they learn a lot through media and watching shows, songs, Disney films, Star Wars. It's something they're motivated by that they are ultimately learning language from. So a lot of parents would come in with, I don't really want my child to have screen time, which is fair enough. There's a lot of evidence behind limiting screen time for a child's cognitive development, but that's where we look at, well, this child might be neurodivergent, and this is actually something that is supporting them to learn in their way at times. Obviously, there could be barriers and different expectations we can set up. Yes, but if that's where a lot of our language is coming from, then what we might do is speak to the therapist in our sessions, and also encourage families to do throughout their everyday routines, is have those instances where we actually take on and use a lot of the language that they're pulling from media in everyday routines. So it might be, I have a client who is really into Monsters Inc. and when things go wrong, it's 2319. So we often use the language and the tone and expression from that movie when there's something going on to alert them and introduce that concept. So what we're doing, being strengths-based and interest-based, is actually taking on their language too. We're not changing it. We're not saying, no, you have to say it this way. we're saying, okay, I recognize that that's the language you've learnt and associated to that activity. So I'm going to use it too. I'm going to follow your lead in actually imitating you. So a lot of traditional approaches teach the child to imitate the adult or to imitate the person that's modeling the skill. Whereas if we flip that in an ND affirming way, what we're doing is saying, actually, I'm going to join in with you. I'm going to acknowledge your attempts and your language, even if it might not make sense entirely to a neurotypical brain. I'm going to work out what it actually means. I'm going to do the work, because what society does to neurodivergent people is say, you need to work in a
No,
neurotypical way.
say it this way.
Yeah,
No,
say it this
say
way.
it this way.
And if the communication breaks down, it's
Literally,
because you haven't tried to think in a neurotypical way.
and
But
on the
what you
weekend,
Yeah.
a parent said to me, "Oh my gosh, Heidi, this person, their child, and they don't correct him." And I went,
Good.
sounds like we're doing a great job. So I just like gently explained that
Yes.
sometimes correcting's really not good.
Yeah. But it also comes back to whose responsibility is it? And if we're modeling in therapy and supporting parents to understand that it's not just about focusing on the child's individual skills and ability to imitate a certain way of being or communicating, then it also means that we're taking some accountability and also recognizing that we're part of that communicative interaction. And if the interaction fails, it's not just the child's fault. It's not just the child being neurodivergent that has caused the interaction to fall apart. It's actually because the neurotypical person or the other brain in that interaction has not also done the work to meet them where they're at or meet them halfway. So I guess that's the big difference. It's we talk about double empathy problem, and that's something we talk about with our clients, with our families. We can again have a whole other podcast on that. It's really about recognizing that it's everybody's responsibility to facilitate positive interactions and learning, and we have to come along for the ride as well,
And we have
rather
to
than
actually
just
realize, if we're coming back to therapy that builds on strengths, if we're a parent, we're looking for a therapist that champions
yes,
the little, and you know what? I'm going to use the word quirkiness.
yes,
The little quirks. The little quirks, because, back in the day when it was just disability, or back when our parents were kids, it was, oh, that's the quirky kid, right?
mm,
That's a lot of what, when I hear what my mum says or what my dad says about, back in a world that had way less diagnoses, I just think that those little quirks are the things that we really need to be tuned in to.
yes,
And
yeah,
like what was it? The Monsters Inc. quote, that's just the beauty of how validating for that child to hear you say his little quirky, and
mm,
it's those quirky little things that your child might say or do, and if you are imitating them, it's sort of validating the person that they are and the way that their brain works and what they wanted to say. So that
exactly.
is strengths-based. It's actually propping them up.
Mhm.
That's a beautiful example. Why is it important that if you're a parent, your child's neurodiverse, you've got a speech pathologist perhaps, or another allied health professional like an OT or a physio that might be involved, a dietitian, why is it important that they educate and support all communication partners?
As we said before, you can't separate the individual skills from who they interact with and where they are in their environment. Adina Levy from Play Learn Chat has a really nice visual that goes with that. But as speech pathologists, we're in a position to understand how they communicate. I mean, we talk about this as speech pathologists all the time, but to live in our world, communication is a major part of that. Even if you can't move or like explore the world physically, you can have ways to communicate regardless of what way that is. And it's our job to help those people find those ways, but also to support the people around them to do that. And again, coming back to that double empathy problem, if the people around them aren't trained in their way of communicating or learning, then they may, without realizing, not push them to do the things that they can possibly do. So I'm going to use assistive and augmentative communication as an example here. So AAC, where we have someone who might be minimally speaking or non-verbal, those terms are changing too. So we're learning and developing there. But people might often assume that they can't do or understand things that they probably can because they just can't say it or express it. But with AAC, there are ways that we can tap into that and tap into what they know. It's amazing, like what doors that can open. And we need to encourage that. We're often met with barriers when it comes to communication partners embracing AAC because it's also new and a different way of communicating for them that they're not used to. So as speech pathologists, it's so important that we actually help to educate them and use our knowledge to make it easy for them to implement this in their environments and also take it on board as something that ends up becoming part of routine and part of natural environment rather than something that's work or a challenge that's too hard, we're going to park it there. But if you're doing that, then we're limiting the potential for this child to show what they can do and interact with their world. So, just to summarize, I guess involving the communication partners in that person's world is so important to increasing the opportunities for positive interactions and opportunities to learn. We can't function in our society without people around us. Yeah.
We're social beings.
We're social beings.
And even if we can't talk the way that someone who's neurotypical, you and I can talk,
Yes.
then we still crave connection and interaction and relationships. And
Yes.
we literally, there's evidence we will not survive without it.
Yeah, exactly. We just need someone to see it. We
It's
just
like this
need someone to
small-
see the potential.
I think it's the single strongest predictor of longevity. Like if you'll
Yes.
live longer, long.
Yes.
It's
Social interaction.
So basically, speech pathologists are the most important professionals in the universe.
We are not biased at all.
There's no bias, none.
Yes.
But really, if you are a parent and your clinician or your speech pathologist, your allied health professional, if your child is having difficulty at school, at sport, I don't know, in any other area of their life, then it is your clinician's role, and you can get your clinician's support. Obviously, if you have the means, there's a barrier there, but
Mhm.
your clinician, if they're ND affirming, should act as an advocate to have those difficult conversations, to sit in that room and ask the teacher the difficult question, or to sit there with you and support you as the parent. It's probably my favorite job as a speech
me too.
pathologist.
I feel like it's an ethical obligation to a degree, but also just we've got power in our knowledge and in our ability to understand people and the ways that they interact with their world. So
Absolutely.
if we have the communication skills to teach them that, then we should be doing it. We should
And
be.
every single teacher became a teacher because they love teaching and they love
Yes.
kids. And I mean, there's some people who are not very nice, sure, but I haven't met many of them. Most teachers that I meet are really keen to do better. But they also want their job to be easier. Like you want your day to go a bit smoother. You don't want things to be difficult. And so really we can help. Teachers we talk about teachers because we generally at POP work with school-aged children. It's the majority of our caseload. But, we could be working with employers, workplaces to help them understand their neurodiverse employees as well. And there's a role that we can play in educating and supporting. All right. So how do we build a positive relationship while still maintaining the challenge and keeping that safe space?
So this comes back to, I guess, taking the time to build a relationship. If you can spend the time as a clinician or as a communication partner in general to get to know a person for who they are and what they like and what their strengths are, then you can ultimately use that as tools to tap into tasks that might be challenging for them. Because as we said, like we want to challenge our neurodivergent kids. We want them to reach their potential. Like we can see that they can do so much more.
We're coaches.
We
We're
are coaches.
watching that brain.
That's right. If we find the ways that work for them in order to get there. But it's also really tuning into, like in every session, in every interaction, really tuning in to what is going on with their whole body. It's not just Like, we communicate with everything. We communicate with our gestures, with our body cues, with our seeking of sensory input or movement. A lot of our neurodivergent kids, when they go to speech therapy, might not be acknowledged in that sense, potentially. Like, I do sessions with kids on the trampoline outside. It's so good that it's through telehealth that we can do that. But even when I was working as a face-to-face clinician, I'd take them down to the physio gym when I was in a multidisciplinary clinic, because that worked a lot better for that neurodivergent brain than in the clinic room. Like, the clinic room had no windows. It was claustrophobic. Like, I felt claustrophobic just in the child, but I could regulate myself in that space with a lot of energy. It wasn't a safe space for a lot of our kids. So if we were to just continue with a traditional model of you have to do therapy here because that's where therapy is, rather than actually, I'm going to take you to a space where I know you feel more comfortable and I can see that your body is more regulated, then I can teach you things because I know you're safe and your body feels safe. Then that is what we mean when it comes to positive and safe spaces. So being able to be that person that goes, hey, I can see that you're not feeling really comfortable here. Let's go over there. Let's go to the gym. Do you want to go outside? Do you want to go to the playground? We can do language anywhere. We don't have to be in a room. We've proven that through working through telehealth, but language and communication goes everywhere. It doesn't have to be in a set environment that feels really clinical and unsafe. But it's also being able to reduce the demands. And like, the cluey clinician will go, I know we don't have much energy today, so I'm going to reduce the demands today right down. And as I see your body get more comfortable, then I'll increase them again. So being able to step through that and adjust demands and expectations as possible.
Wanted to
that's on us.
Yeah. So in parent-friendly terms, so that could mean if you can see that they don't have many spoons.
Yes. Yeah.
Today, we'll talk about spoon theory another time. But when you can see that, like you've said, we don't have much energy today, for a clinician, a great ND affirming therapist might just try 3 times instead of, you might be able to go 10 times. You might be able to practice the skill like 10 times before you do a reward or a preferred task, or when there's lots of spoons present. But you've really got to be able to adapt to that child, their environment, and to be able to maintain the safe space, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. Just quickly, let's go to, we've got this great handout.
So this handout's really an overview for parents and an introduction into neurodiversity affirming practice, and just a bit of a check-in, see how things are going, some or all of these things as part of your therapeutic relationship with your speech pathologist, or is this the way that we're shaping our goals, our therapy tasks? It's not so much a be and end all. It is literally just, here's the place to start. Here is us learning together. It's us trying to move towards being more affirming. Like, we can always do better, but we can always ask the questions. And that's where this checklist came from.
And
there are so many tools out there as well beyond PUB, but we try to simplify it a little bit for our families and give them a place to start.
This is like, you know how there's those books for dummies, this is like intro level neurodiversity. Especially if you're a parent and your child has just got a diagnosis, like what should you be looking for? What can help you? And we know this because we go to meetings. One of our clinicians went to a school meeting with 2 teachers 2 weeks ago, and the feedback from the teachers was, wow, I wish this service was around when my kids were going through school. And I was just mortified because I'm not discrediting what our therapist did, but all she did was go to a school meeting and say, these are the accommodations we should be making for this child. This is the therapy I'm going to be doing. Like, really, this kid has ADHD and they're not going to fit into your system, so let's make it work a bit better. And the teachers were, what? So I still am surprised that, I've been working in this area for a decade and it's not mainstream yet, but these are just some really good checkpoints, starting point. If you're in the therapy room, we're not even talking about the next step, really, which is out in the wild.
Yeah.
And I know that that's a pretty good segue to some of our really great resources.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
I love that actually it's called NeuroWild, and I've just realized she's called NeuroWild because, well, that's what I'm thinking
Yeah.
because we've been talking today about what we should be doing in therapy or what we should be doing as speech pathologists or what you should expect from our speechiest. But that's like the first step, or what's in your family home or what's in your safe space, what's in your therapy room. But out in the wild, you know, it's a very different
It's
story.
very different. Neurowild, Emma's a speech pathologist herself and ADHDer. She is incredible, and she also has a really good way of simplifying concepts around neurodiversity in cartoons. And yeah, really talented. She's incredible, but definitely a go-to for parents like not knowing where to start because it does really simplify things down and make it easy to understand. We've got onwards and upwards there. Psychology, Cynthia Menon, she's an incredible psychologist who also wrote the Brain Forest book. That's also a really great resource to start with in terms of understanding neurodiversity and different brains. And it's really positive, affirming way of explaining that to your kids as well. So definitely one to check out. You mentioned like yellow ladybugs before, and we also mentioned Play Learn Chats, all of our favorites at Pop that we follow. And we also have resources that we can point our families to. We've got some blogs. Lovely Beth has put a blog together about neurodiverse affirming social communication. So go on and check that out. And we also have some other blogs that we follow. There's the Neurodiversity Collective. There's a lot of information on there, that is linked in there. Podcasts are also a really great way for parents to start. So we've got our podcast, and I'm sure there'll be many more episodes to follow after today. But yeah, so many resources out
Absolutely.
there. It's just,
I'm just going to add one more.
yes.
I love Doc Amen
Yes.
on
He's great.
Instagram. I love him. He
Yes.
is I don't want to get it wrong, psychiatrist. His daughter has ADHD.
Yes. He's great. I listen to him too.
And he has scanned over 10,000 brains, and I feel like he's a little bit more geared towards the young adult, like maybe not so much like little kids, but he talks about like topics that people are scared to talk about. He talks about treatment, he talks about medication, he talks about diet and the impacts of diet. He talks about drugs and alcohol when you get older. So he talks about a lot of those things and all of the studies that he's done and how like he's worked with those areas, and I find that really interesting.
Yes. He also lets you make your mind up for yourself as well. He's like, here's the research and here's my practice. Do what you will with it, which is great.
That's it.
Yeah.
He gives two parts of the triangle, and then he lets you put your values over
And
that.
that's what it is. It's about asking questions. It's about just evaluating our perceptions and biases that we come in with, and just trying to do better, be better,
Exactly.
and do better for our neurodivergent kids as well, and families.
The goal of this podcast is to help mums make better decisions, essentially. And if you listen to this and your child is neurodiverse, hopefully it helps you decide what's going to be best for your family. It's not you need to do it this specific way. Like the example I gave of the academic parents versus the farming parents. Like there is no right way to raise your child.
Nope.
It's going to be through the lens of your environment, your experiences, and the resources that you have at hand. If you've got all the resources in the world versus not many resources at all, then that really changes the trajectory of what your journey's like.
Yep, exactly. So no correct brain, no one way of doing things, and it's just a matter of finding the team to support you to work that out along the way.
I think I could leave it there. Well, actually, I don't want to, but thank you very much, Tina. I always have such a robust conversation with you. This is why you're Pop's clinical lead for neurodiversity.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and your questions. That was lots of fun.
And your passion. We've got a few follow-ups to do. So
Yes,
yeah, everyone can see you next time.
sounds good. Thanks so much, Heidi.
I hope you enjoyed learning about neurodiversity and what it means to be neurodivergent. We'd love to hear your questions on this topic, and hopefully we can answer them in a future episode. You can reach me by leaving a comment on your podcast app or sending us a DM on our Instagram. Our handle is @BeyondWordsByPopFamily. Head to the show notes to get your free copy of our mini guide to neurodiversity, plus follow for even more episodes. Before I wrap up, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of land, seas and waters throughout Australia and pay respect to elders past, present and future. Please also remember that this episode is not clinical advice. If you or your child are facing challenges in the areas we discussed today, please seek an individualised speech pathology assessment or chat to your GP. Take care and we'll catch you in the next episode.